In this episode, I speak with Tyler, aka BassForge, aka Static in the Attic, an engineer and EDM music producer who's sort of backdoored his way into the mystical and is probably the first person I've ever spoken with who seems to have come to most of the same conclusions I have around the nature of the universe, and similar to me, seems to have done so in a very compressed period of time. I found this conversation extremely engaging, and I hope you find it as interesting and useful as I did. Tyler, aka BassForge, aka I imagine you have got a whole bunch of other handles that you go by, whether it's music, whether you're into the theory of everything. Thank you for giving us some of your time.
For sure.
So, whenever I'm talking to somebody as interesting as yourself, I love to just start with how the hell did you get into all this intersection of mystical and physics and acoustics? Like, this is a very interesting space to me, and the number of people who have found the kind of number of dimensions that you have related to this is, I could count it on one hand, at least the people that I've come across. So I'd love to hear how you kind of tripped into this, because I imagine you didn't think about this when you were 10. Like, this is what I want to do when I grow up.
No, it was I honestly I had no idea either. When I first started the TikTok, I was honestly I had the goal of just selling music templates because a lot of my friends are in the music industry and they wanted to get into electronic music. So I was like, well, the fastest way to learn that is for me, I just got a project file and I kind of deconstructed it. And so I started making those products and I put them up there. And the first video that kind of went off was one on like the physics of speakers. And I was like, oh man, more people are interested in this stuff than the templates. Let's explore and see what happens, you know? And I had no idea that there was there was that much interest in, I guess, metaphysics and history and all that stuff. I thought it was just me because when I've had the conversations with the people I interacted with, there was a few that were interested in it, but the vast majority of people were like, oh yeah, cool, dude, you know? So I guess I'll start I went to college for engineering. I have a degree in computer engineering, which is a fusion of electrical and computer science. So I started there, and then I worked in the tech industry for about 4 years, and it was just mind numbing. So I quit that, and my dad did building maintenance, so I just started my own company and worked kind of together with him on that for a couple years, and made a ton of money. And I was living really good, but I was feeling kind of empty. Like it wasn't really what I was supposed to do, you know, like I was very good at it, but it wasn't fulfilling me. So I started to explore other things that I could possibly do. And then COVID hit and nobody wanted building maintenance. So I had almost zero income. I cleaned huge office buildings. We did like exterior maintenance on it, window cleaning, power washing, repairs, all that stuff. And everyone just said no. Like I had literally $100,000 worth of contracts just say no overnight. And so I was like,
Damn.
What the hell do I do? So I got a little money from the government just because I had employees and stuff. And it was sucked. I had to lay off a couple and my finances were hurting, but I had nothing to do. So I was making music at the time and I kept doing that. But the more I learned about music, the more I was like, oh, this is like just physics. It kind of related it to the knowledge I had from college, and it got really deep. And then one day it was just like 115 degrees out in Texas, and there was nothing to do. Like I didn't want to go outside, I didn't want to do anything, I didn't even want to make music. And I was talking to one of my buddies online, and he was like, "God, man, it's crazy how how we still don't know how the pyramids are built." And I was like, "Screw you, dude. It's 2023. We know how the pyramids were built." And so I was just Googling it, and then I went down that rabbit hole, the first rabbit hole, and I was like, okay, something's going on here. And from then on, it was just like a cascade of all the esoteric stuff. And then I guess with the music was like the bridge between my education in college and then this metaphysics stuff that I had no idea was really even talked about or like people knew about. So the bridge for me was like, well, I'm just going to make my music project that, you know? And so that was the beginning of the music aspect of it. And then I mean, it was like a year ago is when I started the TikTok, is just because the music industry is like really obviously hard to get into. And so I was like, I'm not going to like compete directly with these guys that are, you know, way more experienced than me. And I wanted to meet them actually so I could get some help. And the only way I could do that was I'm going to take the back door in. I'm going to go social media and just get
Right.
some kind of, I'm going to get attention that way. And then, so that's been my whole strategy this entire time. And I mean, ultimately, it's still to my whole goal with this is to funnel the education side or like the critical thinking side into music, because I don't know if you're familiar with electronic culture, but it's very welcoming, very open-minded, very um, inclusive, and they're very spiritual as well. So it's like the intersection of everything that I loved. And so my whole intention with this is to make education on this more entertaining than what we had to go through in high school or college, because I slept through damn near all of my
Yeah.
classes. And then you know how that goes. You have to chug a energy drink just to watch a YouTube video about the stuff that you should have learned in class. Like that whole cycle is absolutely absurd to me. So my whole goal with it is to make learning about this stuff actually interesting and engage people in a way that's not traditionally mind numbing.
Love it. So did you grow up religious? Did you grow up with any kind of mystical bone in your body, or has this all just come about through this backdoor music?
So my family is primarily Christian. My dad's side of the family is actually Jehovah's Witness, which was an interesting experience. But he left that, and so him leaving that kind of made me question a whole bunch of stuff. But I was still just like
Mm.
defaulted to Christianity. But most of my friends where I'm from Wichita, Kansas, really like mid-sized town in Kansas. But there's a really big Muslim community there, and all of my friends
Oh, shit.
were yeah, practice Islam. So I got exposed to that, and I was like, you know, what's going on here? Because they were saying kind of the same thing, just in a different style, right? So I explored that, and I was like, all
Right.
right, well maybe there's more to this than just like picking a team and saying this is what I believe for the rest of my life. So that kind of opened the door to
Right.
exploring everything else. But as far as growing up, like at church, I was never really like engaged with it. I guess I didn't resonate with what they were what the message was there. I didn't think it was bad by any means, and I still don't think it's bad. But I didn't think it didn't hit me like, oh yeah, this is what I need to dedicate my entire life to. There's good lessons, but that that seemed very surface level to me. And then the I would say the mysticism side of it, I guess if you look into like the Gnostics, the Sufis, the Essenes, all of their stuff seemed to resonate more with me, and that kind of opened the door to the sacred geometry aspect of it. And then I would say, in terms of religion, I would say more secret society, like Rosicrucian Freemasonry information is,
Yep.
in my opinion, the most accurate when it's describing how reality works. But it has that tinge of like the, you know, the controllers of the universe and all this stuff, and like it has a really negative connotation. So you can't really go out. I'm not associated with any organization, by the way. I take information from all of them and kind of compile that. That's my strategy for the whole thing. But in terms of accuracy, I would say that the information from those underground sects of the monotheistic traditions, and then the secret societies, and then pairing all of that with the Vedas and all of that, like, because they, in my opinion, were the most scientifically advanced tradition that the
Hmm.
ancient world had. So I take bits and pieces of it and kind of compile it all in there, because I feel like if you plant a flag and say, you know, I'm Christian and this is what I believe, and all this stuff, it kind of polarizes you from everyone else, and they don't take you seriously. And I feel like that's a bad approach to go if you're trying to unite people and say, hey, y'all are talking about the exact same thing. It's just a different piece of the puzzle. I think that that's a bad way to go about it, because then people are like, well, you're Christian. I can't, you know,
Right.
I don't believe that.
It seems to me, after spending the last few years thinking about this literally every day in various states of meditation or, you know, whatever altered states they may be, meaning altered from the day-to-day, engaging in this capitalistic machine that we've created for ourselves, I get the distinct impression that we are hallucinating everything. That every part of what we call existence is some single frequency, instant by instant, that our bodies act like an antenna and tune into, and it's like every frame snaps in at the instant that you're experiencing it. And that something about our DNA holds the code of the whole universe that says what that instant should look like. And anybody who's followed the stuff around quantum mechanics and the dual slit experiment, Schrodinger's cat, yada yada, it would appear that no physical matter occupies any actual state until it is observed. And I also get the impression that that observation comes sort of tainted with a almost manifested expectation of what it's going to be. And that we have the opportunity to change that next instant, but the energetic cost of the delta between the prior instant and the next one, how far away that is basically what requires you to do miraculous things, means that you have to be in like supreme control of all your energy and the energy around you. And that we've completely lost that over the last 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 years. Because it seems like, you look at the pyramids, how the fuck did we do that? Right? And there's a lot of great theories that suggest that there used to be civilizations a lot more advanced than ours when it comes to managing energy. And those things look like they are acoustic chambers and sound magnifiers and all this other stuff that, like, we don't even understand the tip of the spear in terms of what it could have done, let alone how they came about. What do you
The
think?
the arrogance to say that there are tombs and just leave it at that, to me, it was very
Yeah,
uh
it's a bold
I mean,
choice.
it is a very bold choice, and I try not to do too many videos on pyramid stuff, just because I feel like it's talked about a lot, and then people have a very like biased point of view on it, which is great for engagement, but truly we don't know what the exact function of them were, and they appear to be multifunctional based on just the fact that every one of them isn't built exactly the same, that none of them resemble the Great Pyramid on the internal structure. So what did they do? I don't know. There's a lot of things that say that they could be power plants. There's a lot of things that say, Da Vinci encoded that into the Vitruvian Man. He encoded those lines that line up perfectly with the chambers in the pyramid to the Vitruvian Man. And if you look at the Vedas and the Hindu tradition, that's where your chakras line up as well. So to me, that seems like more of a way of the Great Pyramid, at least. The Great Pyramid seems to be a way of, like you said, it splitting up the frequencies that make up you as a whole, which would make sense with their mummification as well. If you could split that frequency up into the component pieces that make up we'll call it a soul, the consciousness that inhabits your body. If you can split those pieces up and by mummifying it, make that process somewhat immortal, right? Save that soul in another container and then reincarnate it into a new body. That makes kind of sense to me in terms of the way that one's set up. But I've seen the theories on the power plant. I've seen the theories on chemical processing. I've seen all of those, and it could be multifunctional. With how genius that design was and how much effort went into it. Your cell phone can do an unlimited amount of things, and it's this big. What could that do with a technology that we are not aware of? If they're using some sort of technology that runs on, consciously accessing a quantum field of all information, then that thing could be the most powerful device on the entire planet. We don't know. But what we do know is the geometry. We do know that it's aligned to stars. We do know that it's on one of the most energetically hot spots on the planet. So there's a lot of things that are suggesting that it does something that isn't necessarily, it's for sure not a tomb. It's not that. There's no way that there's that much precision in a tomb with no hieroglyphs on it. There's no construction documents on it. There's nothing inside it that indicates that it's a tomb. The evidence for that is, at this point, I think, a little asinine to assume that it's still a tomb. But you also have to take into account there's the Mayan pyramids, and then the Indus Valley has pyramids too, very, very old pyramids. I think they might actually be older than Giza, but they're so eroded they don't even appear like, they look more like the step pyramids. So taking all those into account, I think would give us a better picture of it. But I think that the restrictions in terms of government access and the studies that you're allowed to do on the pyramids are holding society back as a whole. If we could get the people in there that want to do the actual research, I think we could solve it in the next couple of years. But that's, yeah, like you
What do you
said,
think
that's
about
the
the
kind of
idea of like the quantum concept of everything everywhere all at once? Meaning that like every version of reality exists simultaneously, and our consciousness sort of clicks us into a path amongst that, but really all the other versions of reality exist simultaneously.
I think that I've thought about that a lot, actually. And like you said, with the man, the quantum theory gets so muddy because you have a lot of people that are rooted in science that are saying you can't use this for spirituality. This is a, it's, but the quantum is the link between the mystical and the real, right? That's kind of the bridge between where classical Newtonian physics meets metaphysics. It's the bridge between the two. As far as those realities go, I think that's absolutely a possibility, if not the actual way things work. Because if you're not present, if you're not in this conversation that we're having right now, fully engaged, you're either living in the past, thinking about a memory, or thinking about a future event that's going to happen. So your consciousness is traveling between those two, even if it's just your imagination. You can imagine certain things happening in the future, and if you like what that vision is, you can go to that. If I want to go to a concert tonight and I think it's going to be a good time, I can choose to do that, or I can stay home and I can make music, or whatever option that my consciousness can choose, I'm going to go down that path. But you still have the free will to do that. So I think, yeah, you're tuning into the present because it's literally the only thing that is. But your consciousness can travel like a little floating ball into the past and the present and the future at one time, at the same time. So that would be the ever existing field of possibilities, and that's different for every person. So when you think about it that way, there is literally an infinite, unlimited possibility of things that could happen, but you ultimately are going to be the one that chooses that. Now, like you said with the DNA, I think your choice aligns and signals your genetic potential of what you could and could not do. If I think about being a professional NBA player right now, that's probably not going to happen. Like maybe if I thought about that when I was 13, I could have a shot at it. But like, is that in my genetics? I don't think so, and that's where the time comes in. You have to do the math on, is this something that I can compress down into my reality with enough practice and enough knowledge on the subject? Can I make that real? That's what we're meaning. It's not like you sit and you meditate and you become an NBA player. That's never been the case, and that's what's distorted in the public perception of it. But I think the reality of it is, okay, do a critical analysis of your history, your experience, and where you could possibly go in the future, and that kind of is the driving force of your reality. That's your manifesting the future that you want.
Where do you think, actually, let me change the question. Why do you think there's been such a lack of awareness of the interconnectedness of all this stuff for so long? Given that, I think you and I both probably had a very similar experience in terms of like, it didn't take very long to start to see, wait a second, this shit's all connected. Like, Even if it's just at the religious level, like you
Yep.
said, between Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, it's all pointing in the same direction with slightly different verbiage. And yes, there's fringe practices at the edge, but like it's all saying virtually the exact same thing. And it
Mhm.
seems like that's been hiding in plain sight for literally thousands of years. You would think that even just from a purely intellectual level, that like the universities would have called this out in some sort of extrapolated course or something, but it seems like it's very rarely talked about.
It's very rarely talked about in the public circles. I think the university system is still rooted in the industrial revolution system of thinking. So like universities are the path, and I saw this when I was in college. The path was either teach in a university what I learned, like regurgitate it, go into
Hmm.
some sort of research, but the research isn't going to be my research. It's going to be whoever's going to fund the thing that I want to do.
Right.
Like I'm purely dependent on the money there. I can't do what I want to do, or go into a industry and be very good at that. Which even then, the options and opportunities was like spend 20 years and eventually maybe make $500,000 if you're an expert at what you're doing. And then you have to jump around
Yep.
companies and move and all this shit, and that whole system, I think, is the rooting of your free thinking into the material. And I don't know if it was intentional, but I definitely know that it's so prolific now that we are seeing all of the problems with it. I mean, you can see it in disease, divorce rate, just a general like appreciation for life. Some of the stuff I talk about for me was very obvious, but when I posted it, I'll have people come up to me, my old friends or like people that I barely know, and they're like, "Dude, what you're talking about is I've always thought this, but no one was saying it." And I was like,
Mm.
"Okay, well, I just thought that was me. I thought that was only me. I thought I was a little different than everybody else. Maybe I could just think a little bit more outside of that box." But it's becoming increasingly apparent that most people are actually thinking like that, and they're defaulting to the societal norm because it is the societal norm. And so that's another thing I want to hit on with my socials is you don't have to do that. You don't have to go that route. It's and to do that, you have to know that you are ultimately capable. You are the most capable of handling that yourself. No one is smarter or dumber than you. It's just how much do you care about doing that thing. Maybe there's
Mm.
variations slightly in intelligence and genetic potential and whatnot, but ultimately we are the smartest species on the planet if you're looking at it just from a human's perspective. You have the genetic potential to do whatever you want, but that box that people are in is really really confining the unification of the knowledge with the spiritual metaphysical, and splitting that up. I think that since the industrial revolution has really been, now we can't even see how far they're split. Now it's just like, what are we doing here? And a lot of
Right.
people are coming to an existential crisis, and I think COVID accelerated that. I think that a lot of people had time to sit home and be like, what am I doing? What is this worth it? So the
It
critical
seems like
analysis
people
is,
either reach the top, right? They either reach, whether they make all the money or they get the fame or they achieve some piece of what they were chasing their whole lives, and they realize, oh, I'm still empty. Like I'm still depressed, I'm still anxious, I'm still whatever. Or they hit rock bottom and it's either kill yourself or figure out what the hell's going on around here
yeah.
and dig your way out. That seems like both of those things were sort of radically accelerated during that period. And now all of a sudden we've got a lot of people who are like, what the hell are we doing?
Yeah, what's going on? And I went down that path too. Like I was making a lot of money with my business. I had the fancy cars. I went on a whole bunch of trips. I partied my ass off. Like it was fun. I'm not knocking those experiences. It's part of being a human. But like at the end of the day, I would get a car, and 2 months later it's a car. You get a new phone. 2 months later
Right.
it's just a phone. Like everything material, you're just renting it. Even if you own the thing, you're just renting it. So what is beyond that? What is beyond having that experience? By all means. eat the good food, go on the trips, internalize that. But like, there is a deeper thing here, and that's what nobody is talking about. No one's talking about like, okay, if we are living in a simulation, if this is a holographic thing, like what we're talking about, a unified field that gets collapsed upon observation, why are you observing it? Why are you here to observe it? What is the point of you having all of these experiences? And that is what the real question
That's the
should be.
question.
That is the
Yes.
question. Is it developing a conscious entity that can escape the matrix into another level of consciousness? Because we have single cell bacteria, we have us, and then we have what appears to be, from all of the spiritual traditions, a higher level of consciousness. Is that the goal? Is that what we're here to do? All of those traditions say yes, it is. And now we have to. Now I think the job is taking all the materialist stuff, the science, which is very good at analyzing and making use of the material world. How do we take that and use it to make better humans that aren't an infection on the planet, and they're actually here for a purpose? They're actually here to be good stewards of the planet. That's what
Mhm.
we were intended to do with the intelligence.
That actually reminds me of the concept of sort of flow state. And the reason why it reminds me of that is I get the impression that flow state is when you are doing, like we talked about, you've got this DNA that's sort of encoded for your state of the entire universe through your perception. And if you think about the whole universe, if you go from a Big Bang perspective, there's this innumerable if this then that has been sort of set forth since then. And there's a perfect answer to what's the next best thing to do this instant. And I get the impression that flow state is when you are embodying just that. You're listening to your intuitions, like you're sucking out of, whether you call it the Holy Spirit or Akasha or whatever the hell you call it. There's this innumerable data field all around us all the time that if you shut the hell up and are you still enough and present enough, it guides you into do this, do this, do this, do this. And what's really fascinating about that is I also get the impression that that's what happens when you let Jesus take the wheel, where you're not consciously choosing anything, you're just being, and you have quote unquote surrendered to the flow of the universe or surrendered to God or whatever, however you want to phrase it. And when you're in that flow state, just speaking from my own personal experience and having listened to a lot of people like a Rick Rubin, right? Like the great people who have taken and created an unbelievable amount of creative work. That's how all great work is created. It's not by sitting there and using this prefrontal cortex to calculate things. It's by shutting that off and going with the flow. What do you think about that
Absolutely.
concept?
Absolutely. I love Rick Rubin, by the way. I think he's one of the best people at explaining how that flow state works and why it's important. Because there's a thing in music too. It's you can have a good idea for a song, and in your head it sounds really great. But like, once you get down to it, especially as a producer, you have to make drums, sounds, FX, all the stuff. You have to mix them. You have to make it sound really good. That is a really long process. In my head, I know exactly how I want it to sound, but it's going to take me 10 minutes to make that synth sound the exact way I want it to, right? And in that 10 minutes, I've lost a little resolution to the idea of that song,
Mm.
right? So there's a strategy that if I'm showing somebody how to make music, and I learned this from just a bunch of artists that I've talked to as well, so I know it's kind of prolific in the industry, is just you sit down and you have, say I want it at 150 BPM, I want it at this drum beat, whatever. You sit down, you set your stuff, you put a loop in, don't give a shit about the drums. Throw in a sound in the exact melody that you hear in your head, throw in a couple little things here and there, get the framework down, And then once you're in that zone, you've made like at that point 6 or 7 decisions in a row that are super fast, and you've done it in 5 minutes. That starts getting those gears to click in terms of creativity. And then from there, you can build a song into where you want it to go. It may not be exactly what's in your head, but it's going to be better than sitting there and tuning a synth for 2 hours, right? So from that, I think building that momentum is actually building a I would compare it to like an internet connection. It's a faster internet connection to whatever that source is, the source of creativity is, and that flow state just opens up the floodgates to how much you can receive at that moment. And it's all dependent on action. It's all dependent on you are choosing right now to do that thing. If I'm making a TikTok, I'm doing nothing else except making that TikTok. I want all of my creative, I want to be able to connect all the ideas that I possibly can into this 1 minute video because that's my creative boundary. And I'm opening up the widest channel possible for that creativity to flow so I can communicate that as best as possible because it's in my head. I know the concept I want to talk about. But sometimes you get into that, like, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this. You go down rabbit holes and you're like, man, how do people even understand this? How would I even tell this to like someone close to me without sounding like an insane person, right? Like you get in those
Yep.
moods and then you're like, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to internalize this and like think about it for a couple weeks and then maybe I can figure out how to communicate this. That's not how it works. It's you got to say you're doing it and then start those gears clicking in so that connection can open up and you can get the full expression of creativity that is going to communicate that idea. And that's, you have to care enough about something to do that though. Like you have to notice something in the world is so not in alignment with how you want it to be. And I mean, it's a selfish kind of point of view if it's not altruistic, but that's just how you have to go about the world. That your pains and your annoyances with all of everything that's going on in society are the biggest drivers for you to have that creative moment. And that to me is alignment with purpose. If something, pisses you off or frustrates you enough that you have to change it, that's your purpose. And then the bigger connection you can open up to the creative source to communicate that idea in whatever medium that you do, that's your purpose. If it's, technology, if it's art, if it's podcast, if it's TikTok, I don't care what it is. Everyone has their method of doing it, no matter who you are.
Yep.
And your main goal is to see how much of that you can channel from the creative source. That's what I think you're a lot of people have struggled with in terms of like modern society of finding purpose, because you get told, hey, you got to make this you have to update this program, or you have to make this 100-line coding thing that's super complex, and it's a cool project, but you're like, I don't really want to do that.
Who
I don't
cares?
really, it's not getting me going.
You ever hear the line, I think it's from the Bible, faith without works is dead?
Yeah.
I think that drives home like what you're talking about, which is like this notion that like you can have all the thoughts and emotions and whatever you want internal, but that's not what we're here for. We are here to take that and manifest it in the world.
I think
And I
Alex
think a
Hormozy.
lot of
Sorry.
say again?
I was watching a video from Alex Hormozy because I'm super in the entrepreneur world too, but he explained it like the way he said it. He said the meaning of decide isn't to choose; it's to cut off all other options. That one hit me
Right.
so hard because it's again with music. There's an infinite amount of things that you could do to make a song. But you have to
Right.
decide, I'm making this genre at this BPM with this instrument. Once you do that, then you're good. But if you sit there and you're like, man, what could I do? I've done that for days. I've done that for literally days and got nothing done. It's the worst feeling in the world to me. So to decide, like you said, is the works of your faith. It's I'm deciding that this is what I'm going to do, and then you surrender, like you say, and it will work itself out. It always does. Every time I do it, it works itself out. And it's one of those metaphysical things when you tell people, they're like, oh yeah, but what's the practical
Nah.
steps? That's the practical step, bro. That's what you do.
So how do you feel about this sort of conundrum of surrender and free will. Because the best parts of my day are when I'm not making choices, when I'm just doing. I shouldn't even say doing, because we're human beings, not human doings, right? So when I'm in the moment, fully present, engaging with everything in front of me, this is shut off. It feels like this is the decision center, the free will center.
Yeah.
And whenever that part's turned on, I feel like I make the worst choices. Like I dig my holes the deepest.
Same.
So it's almost like living the best life is relinquishing that need for control. But then it's really hard to reconcile that with the premise of free will. Because if free will is like how we differentiate ourselves from everything else on earth, it's like, well, then what the hell are we doing?
Yeah. That is
Have
a
you thought about that?
yeah, that is a very, very that's one of those things that I think is what shuts people off from looking at the spiritual traditions, because no one can really explain that very well. And
Right.
I will be the first one to say that I am not 100% sure on the mechanics of that, but what I do know and what's helped me with that is intuition. If I have that decision, if I know I want something, I have to separate it from, is it a desire, or is it a am I just wanting to do it for, do I desire it for my personal growth, or do I desire it for an immediate pleasure, or something that's just like a gut feeling, like it's going to make me feel good in the moment. If it's something
Yep.
that's going to make me feel good in the moment, to differentiate those two, I go silent, like what you're saying, and I'm like, who's feeling this? Is it my body that's feeling this, or is it my higher self making the choice that's saying, you know what, if you do this now, the body will have, it's whatever its pleasure wants, it will have it in an exponential amount in the future if I make this choice. So I would lean more on philosophy for that, for the answer to that question, because that seems more like a moralistic, a question more for morals versus just like intelligence or like sentient life, because an animal doesn't have those thoughts, like an animal is going to go, I'm hungry, I need to eat, and it's going to go try and
Right.
find food. That's like a survival instinct. But we can differentiate between, I'm hungry, but I know I'm going to get food in a couple hours. So I'm just not going to snack. I'm going to do my work and I'm going to get my food in a couple hours, because right now, if I have some crappy snacks, it's probably going to make me feel worse. I'm not going to eat the good food later, and I'm going to distract myself from the stuff that I have to do. So in my opinion, I think the free will is the universal test to see if you go down the path of higher thinking, or if you cave into your lower desires that are rooted more into
You're
the
primal.
physical world. But I think that can only be experienced in the physical world, because if we were perfect, we wouldn't have a concept of imperfection. So to learn about imperfection, to learn about the whole concept of being a not perfect thing, you have to have something pulling you in the other direction. If I can just be perfect all the time, then you are God. And that's kind of just Alan Watts talks about that a lot. That becomes boring after a while. You can do anything. It's
Yep.
like God mode in Grand Theft Auto. Like, it's fun, but how often are you going to play on God mode in Grand Theft Auto? You want to restrict yourself to the missions. You want to be able to die, because it's not fun if you can't die. You're just walking around just like messing with the town. That's cool
It's
for a
really
minute, but
hard.
yeah.
It's hard to convey that to people. I had the same exact experience with Diablo 3. I played that game a ton. I absolutely loved it. And I was advancing, and it was like there was no amount of time I could play where it wasn't still engaging. And then I figured out how to literally hack it and turn myself into
Yeah.
infinite everything for all intents and purposes. You just walk in a room and everybody explodes. And it was fun for about 2 days.
Yeah.
And then I stopped playing the game entirely.
Yeah.
Because it's like, what is the point? What am I doing? Like, there's no longer any engagement. There's nothing to learn. There's no challenge. And To me, it is the best explanation of what we're doing here, if there is a God that exists, which is that we are like the tentacles of exploration. Just what if?
Uh-huh.
What if you created a boy on this planet Earth, born in Massachusetts, with all this history and all these things? What happens? And then you multiply that by infinity, and you have this endless source of, I don't want to call it entertainment because that's not quite the right word, but engagement of things to be interested in.
Or perspective.
And you add on top of that the ability to have free will, and that creates each, because if you had it with just animals, let's say, there's not a ton of real interest in that, because if you are in fact omniscient and omnipresent, then from the moment it starts, you know how it ends.
Yeah.
Right? There's no mystery in it, because it's all if this then that, and you've
We've
got a
already seen the
computer
movie.
big enough to compute the whole thing, right? Whereas we get inserted in this thing, it's like, oh, what are they going to do? I wonder what's happening here.
That's the
It
excitement.
adds some dimension of, yeah, I guess mystery is the right word.
There's a concept in hermetics too. It's the polarity too. Like you can't the measure of the swing to the left is the measure of the swing to the right. So you can only be if you only know happiness your entire life. This is like the rich kid syndrome. If they have all the money and all of the opportunity and they experience all of the things by 18, most of them just turn to drugs and start fucking around. Like most of them just
Mm-hmm.
go down that path and they're like, I don't care. I've done it all. They were like the epitome to me of someone playing this game on God mode. Like you could do anything. Your parents are probably super well connected. If you need anything at any moment, you can just do it.
Yeah, you can't
You
get
know,
in trouble. There's nothing you
can't get in
can't get
trouble.
out of.
But you're pretty much above the law if you have enough money. You just you can do whatever. So I think that, but also, are they there to show you that? Like if we're thinking about this whole thing and it's your individual perspective, like if you don't see those guys and be like, nah, I don't want to do that, you probably have to go through that. You probably have to learn that. That's probably some part of you that's missing that you need to integrate so that you can have that experience and do something else. I think that whole grand, you know, concept of your life going exactly how you want it to be and all that stuff, that's not I don't think that's a good way to, or something to strive for. I don't think that's something to strive for at all. Definitely try and have the best life you possibly can. But without these certain experiences and even like, man, I hate going down this path because then you get a lot of blowback. But like deaths and really horrible things like that, those are really hard to explain. And like when something like that happens, even atheists, I feel like a lot of the time turn to religious leaders or people that try and explain this because they're the only ones that try and tackle it. Because that's how you have to look at it. Like that, it had to happen. It's. I've had more people in my life go through things like suicide and stuff like that than my parents have, and I found that very weird. Like I didn't expect that, and honestly, I don't ever like you know providing my personal input on that because going through something like that is a unique individual experience. But you still have to integrate it. There's no other way to go about life like that. The
What
the
else are you going to do?
unfortunate thing of reality is everyone you're either going to watch them die or you're going to die before they do. That is the sad reality of what we're doing here. And coming to terms with that and learning how to deal with that, that is an impressively hard thing to go through. That can, take months out of your life. You can be crippled from doing everything if someone close to you dies like that. It's a ridiculous experience. But the only method that I know of to get through that is to look at it that way. It's like I don't know why, but it must have had to happen for a reason because I take ultimate responsibility for everything. I chose the path, but if I would have chose a different path, maybe they would still be here. But I had the free will. I chose this path, and I guess I have to deal with it. That's it, and it makes you a stronger person, I think. Because if you cave into like, oh, everything's just happened to me, then you're stuck in victim mindset like the rest of 90% of the planet.
And when you say chose the path, do you mean chose the path from when you eventually gained agency as a kid, or do you mean chose the path like a star seed? Like I chose this lifetime and this like set of circumstances.
Well, I think both. I think you have to become of age to understand the whole starseed concept. Because as a kid,
Right.
I thought I was the smartest kid alive, and I was like, "That's stupid. That's astrology crap. That's
Yep.
not, like as a kid." And like I was at one point, I was very atheistic, and like I was against everything because it was just like these guys are
Same.
stupid. And so like taking agency as a kid and taking agency as a adult, I think are the two splits, and I think you hit that at two different points. So like the choices you make as a kid, I don't know if they're necessarily as um, crucial, just because you do have parental oversight. You have people there that kind of have your back and to be like, don't do that. That's not going to come work out for you. But as an adult, if you don't take agency as far as like the you chose this path in terms of a cosmic, starseed type of a thing. If you don't assume that position that you took, that you are making these choices from that perspective, then you are that may be the biggest shackle to the material world that you have, because like everything at that
Mm.
point is happening to you and you were just like in no way in control. And I think that has been taken from like the most amount of people in the world right now. Is like they think that they cannot do anything about their circumstance. And granted, there are people
Life
that are
just
in some
happens to them.
very bad circumstances. I'm not downplaying that. But not taking agency and just sitting down, laying down and accepting it. And honestly, that to me means asking for more of that. If you accept that, people are going to give you that. Not taking the hard route and saying, I'm not going to stand for this anymore, is that is how the world has progressed. We have coming out of racism or women's rights or whatever. It's when when two or three people were just like, we're not doing this anymore. And then the group gets behind them, and then they're like, okay, well, society has to bend to that now because nobody's accepting that.
Did you ever read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning?
I've touched on it a couple times. I've never read it all the way through.
It's the case has been a while, and for people who aren't familiar with it, it's a gentleman. He was actually, I believe, a psychologist who ended up in a encampment during the Holocaust and lost all of his works, all of his family. And basically, the conclusion he came to while he was in there is that we are in complete control of our experience, no matter what happens to us. We get to decide the meaning that we associate with all events. And if you can assume that this guy who weighed under 100 pounds at one point, was literally on death's door and watched hundreds of people around him lose their lives and be at the absolute bottom of humanity, if he could have that perspective and truly believe it in his entire being, then what state could any of us be in where we couldn't also choose that, you know? So that's been
Exactly.
really powerful for me in terms of shaping, like, suck it up, buttercup. Like, yeah, shit happens to you and it's hard, and to lose people you love is hard, and to have, financial circumstances that might come out of left field, that's hard. Like, there's so many things that are hard, but you're not in the Holocaust and you're not that. And even if you were, you could still choose to make meaning out of that.
And you
Like I've
would.
often thought, if I somehow ended up getting framed for something and I ended up in jail, like there are still people who make meaning out of their lives behind bars, wrongfully imprisoned, and they can still create something magical out of this experience. And like we were talking about, it would appear that there's a chance that we chose it. And so to accept that that might be true and then live the highest version of this little game that we're in with all the circumstances in front of us, it's like, what else are we going to do? Cry about it? Like, yes, cry about it, by the way. Don't like trap your
Yeah.
feelings, because that
Yeah.
leads to a whole bunch of other shit.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
like, faith without works is dead. Like, take some action, do something about it.
Yeah. And the one thing underlying all of the stuff that I like to post online is that and I try and do this with as many people in the comments as possible, is if they say that, like, my brain isn't meant to understand this, or like it's almost a self-deprecating, and I know it's a joke, but like the way you talk about yourself like that is going to be the way that your reality projects itself. If you say,
Right.
I use this example all the time. I had a friend, he in college. I was an engineering major. I was a sophomore, and he had not decided to go to college. He didn't want to go to college. And then out of nowhere, he decided he wants to be a math major. And this guy, like in high school, I had to walk him through math. Like he decided that he wanted to be a mathematician. I was like, I don't know if that's right for you, man. And he's like, no, I'm doing it. And he not only graduated the same year as me, being a year behind, he got better grades than me in almost every class. And the
No
one day,
shit.
he just was like, I'm going to do math, and I'm going to do math, and I'm going to be fucking good at it. Like, you have no idea. Another good example. Today, I was at the gym, literally, I just came back from the gym, and I tracked my workouts on this app on my phone, and I looked at it, and I was like, okay, we're going to do, I think it was like 70 pounds on bench press. And I looked at it, and so I walk up, and I grabbed what I thought were 70s, and it said 12 reps on my deal, right? So I throw the weight up, do 12 reps, put it down, and when I put it down, I accidentally grabbed the 80s. But in my head, it felt like 70s, like I had made my whole body feel like those were 70s. Like I usually go up increments of like 5 pounds because I don't want to tear my shoulder, right? But like
Yep.
a 10-pound jump on that, I should have been doing like 8, but just
Right.
the thought in my head that weight was 70 pounds allowed me to do 4 more than I would have done if I had made the choice to do, I'm going to do 80 for 8. Like the
Right.
belief, the power of belief is unbelievably
Why?
powerful and understated in today.
I totally agree with that.
It's crazy.
Let's take a right hand turn. Let's talk about dimensions beyond space and time. What are your thoughts there? What have you observed? What I know there's a whole lot of stuff that's been written about it across time. Uh, what's your take on it?
So I try and take everything from, like I said, many sources, and the esoteric traditions. And when I speak about that, I'm speaking mostly about Rosicrucianism. And if you're not familiar with that, I highly recommend looking into it. They're very, very, very educated in sacred geometry, and in my opinion, the best people at explaining dimension from from a perspective that's not as scientific. Because if we're talking about scientific dimension, we're talking about just space, right? We're talking about like 1D, 2D, 3D, or if you're thinking like higher level mathematics, you could go through E8 and have these 8D shapes that are just shadow projections of reality, which if you watch some of my videos, I do cover that stuff. But dimension to me is more of a, once you break out of the physical, you have to think about it in a spiritual sense as well. So you have your lower dimensional consciousness, in my opinion, which is like a cellular level. Your consciousness controls the lower consciousness of your body. May not necessarily be able to control how your organs are functioning, but if you're stressed out, your organs are going to perform differently, right? If you're very happy, if you're very
Mhm.
fulfilled in life, you're going to have a different look, and your body is going to reflect that. So I'd say that's like your lower level of consciousness. And then you have your traditional, like, I would say like Carl Jung or Freudian like psychology perspectives of that, versus like your ego and your higher self and the collective unconscious. That is like your 3-dimensional self. But I do believe you can separate that from, in what would be like the spiritual traditions. You have your energetic self, your astral self, your other self, like where you go when you dream. All of that stuff there seems to be something there. And so dimensions, when we're talking about that, I think you exist 3-dimensionally in those sort of um, conscious realms. 4 dimensions for me, the 4th dimension is, I explain it as time, because you can't experience a
Right.
3-dimensional object without moving around it, right? A cube,
Right.
if you look at it, when you draw it, looks like a hexagon in 2D. But if you move around the cube, then you can tell that it's squares, you know? So time allows us to have that perspective. And that time encapsulates your
Create
consciousness in
motion.
this world. Huh?
To create motion
Yes.
through space.
So that to me, time is the a lot of people say it's a prison. I don't think it's a prison. Time encapsulates your consciousness into the 3D reality here. But fifth dimension is where it gets weird, and above that is like that's gonna go into like spiritual, even more esoteric stuff. But in fifth dimension, I would say that is more of a what you would call like a Christ consciousness, or what people refer to as gods, prophets, stuff like that. I feel like they could traverse from they could get outside of the prison of time and remove themselves from that, escaping into a place where they could see all things. And I think psychedelics gives a window into that. I think psychedelics are
Can confirm.
yeah, they're a glimpse into the unreal, not unreal. It's more real to me than this is, but it's a window where you're holding on to this reality, but you're barely holding on. You're just like there's a thin little tether, and you are off exploring the universe. And then at some point, when that the chemicals wear off, that tether is like nope, and it yanks you back in, right? Especially on higher level substances, it becomes more and more, the resolution of it becomes way more clear, and it appears that that is a world that, one, we need to explore more, and two, you have more control because you're not limited by time. You don't have to move through physical space. Your thoughts can traverse instantly. So that is the separation between the dimensions. Anything above that to me is still kind of a gray area, but as far as that goes, I think that psychedelics may be the only thing that could explain that in terms of what words can't, because even trying to explain a psychedelic experience to anybody is going to fall flat in terms of like
It's like trying to taste color.
versus experiencing that is not even it's not possible. You can't do it. So, but I think that it can be that can be modulated. Your experience can be modulated, and I definitely think more research needs to go into that because it's incredible.
I have a lot of people who are not psychedelically experienced, who are like on the edge of curiosity. And I'm sure people listening to this are very likely to be in that camp. What do you recommend to folks when you meet someone like that who's not experienced and looking to get involved, but without having a schizophrenic meltdown? Which I think, if somebody did 8 grams of psilocybin on, unannounced without realizing what the hell they were getting themselves into, certainly could be prone.
Yeah, I
Do you take it like case by case, or do you have like, hey, if you're getting involved, stay away from this, maybe try this or this, or do you
it
stay totally out of that camp?
depends on their level of interest. If someone this is and you watch anything on psychedelics, they'll tell you that set and setting are the most important. But I would also say
For sure.
setting, and a guide is even more important, especially if it's your first time. One, rules: never, ever, if you're experimenting with this, without consulting someone, just make sure you're in an okay, healthy state to do that. I think psychedelics are very destructive for that, because it's going to amplify whatever you're if you're very nervous about it and you're going into it with like a skeptical mind, you're probably going to have a rough time. That's why I think it becoming more public and having people talk about it being one of the most transformative experiences of their life is helping a lot. But on a case by case basis, I'm never going to be like tell someone not to do something, if they truly desire to do it. But I feel like the shamanic traditions were on the right path, because if you go to South America, for example, or even Mexico, their process is a lot better. You don't even get to do it for a week. You have to get on a very clean diet. You have to purge your system. You have to be in a very, like, your body has to be in a good state, and you go
Safe,
through all this
relaxed state.
relaxation. It's a peaceful environment. It's in the jungle or whatever, like that. And then someone's there to pretty much hold your hand if you're, going through some stuff, because you're gonna go through some stuff, especially on like some more of the unstable. I would say I would classify like shrooms or ayahuasca as like an unstable psychedelic, where it's wavy. You have really good moments,
Yeah.
and you have really like holy shit moments. But something a little more stable, like maybe I would say like acid and DMT are probably a little more stable, but those things are, again, this is bridging like right on the border of like the medical industry really needs to study these, and I'm glad universities are, because there's a lot of people doing personal research, but like if you're just someone who's interested and you don't know what you're doing and you take something, it's not like getting drunk or smoking weed.
Right.
They're wildly different, and they've been
Yeah.
classified in the same realm as cocaine, which like blows
Is
my mind that that's a thing. Like,
bananas. Yeah.
yeah, you can do a freaking 8 ball of cocaine, and you won't even come close to the
Your heart
experience.
might explode, but you're not gonna go to
No,
another dimension.
no. So I think it's still a really touchy subject, but I think the transformative potential, especially for therapy like PTSD, therapy for people maybe over 50 would be very helpful, because you got a lot of baggage and trauma from all your life that you haven't processed. Exceptionally helpful with that. The people that I know have done it have absolutely had their life changed. So I would say it's definitely case by case, and like in terms of levels of it, obviously someone who's just getting into it, don't start with DMT. Like start with and it's again, you can microdose on shrooms too. Like that to me is like the better therapy than a lot of these harmful pharmaceuticals. But until we get there legally, what do you do?
There was a time I was microdosing every day, and it felt like two things were happening. One is I felt like it was widening the aperture on intuition. Like it was giving me greater access to that like answer to the test of what to do instant by instant. And two is I felt like it jammed me in the moment. Like my proclivity to go into the future or the past, like you talked about, it felt like that was like the vibration wasn't right for that. Like it would
You
bring me
almost can't do
back
it.
into like exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
forces presence almost.
And there's so much value in that.
I totally agree, and I think that,
And
man,
there's
like
other ways to get there, right? Like you can get
there
there
is.
through yoga, you can get there through meditation, you can get there through well, I shouldn't say infinite. There are lots of different ways, because that's the natural state. That
Yeah,
is the quote unquote truth. Everything else is a distraction. But
also here,
there's something about these plant medicines that like
I agree.
jam you there in a way that you know, if you haven't found the way to be that still, it's almost like it takes you by the hand. It's like,
Here
come
it
with me. I'll show you.
is. But I think there's a social stigma too about, well, at least there has been, about like meditation and spiritual practice and stuff like that. Like, if you're not, eh, I think there's a view, or at least what I see, even in a city like Austin, is pretty open minded, that like if you didn't grow up a Buddhist, or if you're not familiar with these traditions, it's just like weird for you to do that, or weird for you to meditate, or something, like something that's been a natural human thing for literally thousands of years, and most people used to do it, now has become this weird, like, I'm too cool to do that stuff, which sucks, because you can have those mystical experiences while meditating. I do it all the time. But what the value of psychedelics does is those people with that ego resistance to meditation or yoga or anything like that, that actually connects you with you, it forces you to do that. It says, your ego, take a seat. Here's the actual things about reality that you need to look at. And then I'll let you back in, but you're in timeout for about 6 hours. You're going to sit there. We're
Yeah.
going to take you and we're going to show you some stuff. And then you can come back and have a chat with yourself. Like, the value there is maybe dropping the ego. And that's a huge concept in psychedelics, is the ego death. But I'm really glad that people are becoming more open-minded to it, because that was my almost the beginning of where I started looking into this stuff, was the first time I tried psychedelics. and it kind of just gives you, like what you said, it increases the resolution of your present perspective on things. It kind of makes everything else that you've been thinking about seem nonsensical. It realigns your
Yeah.
you.
I've found myself as either like on the come up or during like deep sort of intuitive moments of just saying, of course, of course.
Yep.
Like as if you're remembering something from an ancient time
Yeah.
and you just forgot it. And it's
I had
just
a
coming back to you like, of course.
the last time I tried it, I ran a little experiment, and I had like a shroom stem left over, and I was like, I'm gonna eat this stem and I'm gonna see if I can make music. And because it's complex on like a EDM perspective, there's a lot of shit that's going on. I was like, can I keep one
Right.
foot in reality and one foot in the in the mystical and do this? And on the come up, I was like, I got this. And it had to be like,
Nice.
it wasn't even a lot. It was probably maybe a little over a gram. But like as it started to hit, I was like, this does not look like music anymore. And I was sitting there and I was like, all right, I'm just got to switch my perspective. And like I sat there and consciously I was like, all right, give me all you got. Like I want to learn some new stuff. I want some information. I really want to understand some things that I have not thought about. And that little 1 gram usually doesn't really last that long. It lasted for like 8 hours. And I was getting so much in my
Oh, wow.
head, I consciously had to be like, I get it. I get it. I don't want any more. I got enough. Like, just let me sleep. I need to process all of this right now. And it just kept coming. And I was like, I can't write anymore in my notes. Like, there's just too much to unpack. So
Hmm.
I just needed to chill out. And that was like a really, really big epiphany to me about your intention with things. Sometimes you have an
Yeah.
intention going in with it, and like you said, you just kind of have to flow with it. If it doesn't go the way you want to go or want it to go, you got to accept that and just roll with it. Like you asked for this, you did the shrooms,
Nowhere to
so
go. You're there.
deal with it. Yeah,
I so I don't remember if I said at the beginning of the podcast or when we were talking just before, but I used to do twice a week sensory deprivation floats, and I would say a little prayer before getting in, and then I would set some kind of an intention. And a bunch of times, my intention was, "Show me something." And in retrospect, especially having gone in a couple, well, more than a couple times in altered states,
yeah,
that was a bold thing to ask of the universe as I get into this thing where, like, because
yeah,
you can't, there's nothing to see, there's nothing to feel, there's nothing to hear. You are just in, you get the closest thing you possibly can to just your consciousness. And there's a lot of stuff you can be shown.
yeah.
And like you're saying, though, I don't want to say I felt like the prayers protected me, like as if it's some kind of like, because I don't believe in things the way that quote unquote classically culturally we depict them. But I do think that setting your intention very meaningfully in a way that like I'm doing this for the higher good, I'm doing this to heal, I'm doing this to learn. Show me what I need to see. Like what's the next thing? I think
Yeah.
you'll always get something of use. It won't destroy you because why are we here if we're just going to get destroyed? Like there's something there.
Well, if you
So I do
think about
think
it,
that
like
the intention is a huge piece of it.
when we were talking about the dimensions, right? That fifth dimension, you can move freely, and you, in my opinion, have access to more knowledge than you have here. Um,
Hmm.
and there has to be something steering that ship. That is your
Right.
consciousness. That there's something that it drives you to search out the places that you go there. And if you don't have that going into it, I think it's going to blow you around and you're going to be surprised at where you end up. But for
Yeah.
example, I've had problems in my friend group that I didn't really know how to deal with. Like it was a pretty complex problem. I didn't know the right move, and I didn't even do like a really high dose as another shroom type thing. And I was like, I just want to feel what the right move is. I don't want to be
Mm,
shown. I don't want to be told. I don't want anything like that. I want to know to my core what is the right decision here, because if I feel it, I'm not going to second guess it. If I see it, or if
right.
someone tells me, I'm going to think about it. I'm going to analyze it. I'm going to be like, is this the right move? But if I feel it internally, and I know in my heart that that is the right move, I will act accordingly with confidence. And I did, and to me, so far, it was the right move, and I feel like to me, I feel good with the decision, and that's, I think, all that matters. But there definitely have been times when, if I wasn't going that route, I would have second guessed it, and that gave me a lot of peace. And I think that there's so many applications for normal everyday people in everyday life where they go through those things where it's like, was that the right move? And it's because you're really trapped in here and you're not listening to here, and those things, like what we were saying, kind of forces you into presence, and it forces you, like the sensory deprivation tank, just to feel. You can only
Right.
feel. There's no sensory input. You just have to process your thoughts. And you're insane for doing that, by the way. I was thinking about like I was thinking about trying that. I was like, man, I wonder what this would be like on shrooms. Well, maybe I should try like smoking some weed before first. But
I would say try it with some weed first.
yeah,
Get yourself acclimated a few times, because the first couple times you do it, you can't really relax completely
yeah,
because you're still getting used to. Because when you're laying there, the water is almost at like the crest of your eyes.
yeah.
So there's a piece of you that's still holding on to your musculature,
Uh-huh.
worried about
Right.
collapsing. Once you've done it enough times, you can truly let every atom of your body go. And it was those experiences that weren't on psychedelics where I felt like I merged with the universe, because all of my bodily self was like, there's nothing to do here. And I stopped breathing for minutes at a time when that happened. Which, if you go deep into the like yogic and Vedic type of,
Yeah,
literature, it's like that was a thing that just people knew how to do, was to
yeah.
just basically you put your body in like a hibernating state and your consciousness just goes wherever. Like there's a book,
Yep.
The Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, that the stuff he describes sounds insane. It's like there's no possible way this is real. But the more I get into this stuff, I'm like, probably happened. Like maybe people did suddenly just astral project themselves, an entire country away and have a conversation and come back. Because like you said, if you're operating in the fifth dimension, it's just like a piece of paper, right? When you
Yeah.
think about one versus two dimensions, if I put a dot on the corner of this paper, it's like, oh, it looks like it's there. But in three dimensions, I fold it over, like, just kidding.
You're immediately
I can
there.
bring myself to it. So
Yeah.
exactly. So we have no idea, really, is the net of it, right? We have no idea how anything actually works. All
Yeah.
we can do is make our best approximations and try and put ourselves in a direction that feels, like you were saying, feels right. And
Trust your intuition.
you can't truly feel when your gut microbiome is a disaster because your
Diet's
diet
crap.
is shit. And you can't truly feel when you're sleeping 4 hours a night and you're ramming, rain energy drinks down your throat. And you
Yeah.
can't feel when you're hungover 80% of the time. And you can't feel when you're in a triggered rage state because your PTSD alarms are constantly going off because you haven't healed any of your old trauma and you're in a situation where you're constantly being re-triggered, right? Like the way that most people go through life is never able to feel. And so you're never going in a direction that's quote unquote true north because you're constantly being
You don't know
distracted
what north
because
is.
exactly, there's no compass because your compass is rusted and fucking fogged up and all this other stuff.
But if you can, think about the amount of energy that's going into all of that. Like your gut to process all that food requires a lot of energy. Your PTSD
Right.
to come up with those thoughts and channel it into an emotional reaction, it has to move your heart. Your heart rate will increase. That's energy, right? Like you said with the sensory deprivation tank, even feeling the water on your eyes, your consciousness is accepting the signals from that water on the edge of your eyes and processing it like, don't let the water get in my eyes, If you can redirect
Yep.
all of that energy, that's another way of opening that, I would call it the flow state channel, into getting out of the actual physical here. And like what the Vedas would, or the Hindu tradition would say, is, opening the crown chakra and going out, or like getting something that's not necessarily reality. It's going out and tapping in to the surrender of, there is something more there. There's something more, and it knows vastly more than you do. Every cell in your body obeys you because you are the higher intelligence, right? And until you experience a higher intelligence in one way or another through meditation, psychedelics, or whatever experience you're going to have, until you do that, you're probably going to be stuck in exactly what you talked about, in some sort of state that requires so much energy that you are locked into 3D reality. You can't escape it. And that's the prison. I
You
think that's
ever you ever read or listen to Michael Singer, the guy who wrote The Untethered Soul?
I've never read. I've listened.
So he one of his talks, because he does like these weekly talks at his Temple of the Universe. He's talking about like as high intelligence as we are, the notion of like the meta intelligence of the universe, or God, as to me, God is just everything that there is, right? It's not
Yeah.
a person, it's not an avatar. It's like all the things that encompass all reality equals God.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, so let's say you're a female and you've got a baby inside you. Grow a foot. Like, what do we think we actually, quote unquote, do in terms of like the as opposed to taking a seed and putting it in the ground and it
Yeah.
just blossoms, right?
Yeah.
Like our actual faculty outside of ourselves in our consciousness is so limited. And it's this weird sort of tension between the hubris of thinking we are the masters of the universe, and then the reality, which appears to be we are the masters of our universe,
That
right?
is
And it's
all.
like, if you can't figure out that balance, you end up in this like
Purgatory.
terrorized state. Yeah, exactly.
Purgatory.
I never thought about it like that. That's exactly right. Because you can't truly embody all that you really are, and you're haunted by this myth that you are God and that you can control everything. And it's like, good fucking luck.
Yeah. And then not only that, when you get proven wrong because you can't control something, you're like, am I not God? And then you have this
Right.
existential crisis, which amplifies the whole thing. So you're like, the only answer is just, dude, surrender. Just, that's it. Just let go. You're hanging off a cliff. You think the cliff is like a mile high and you're this far from the ground. Let go. That's all you got to do.
And that's the Alan Watts way, right? This
Yeah.
notion of, there's nothing to hang on to, right? We're all clinging to this, it's like we're in an ocean and we're trying to find land. And it's like the more you thrash, the closer you are to drowning. And
Yeah.
if you could just lay back and float, not only could you enjoy the beautiful sky and the birds flying overhead, you could relax. And this peril that you're constantly worried about would just
Go
disappear.
away. Yeah.
But
There's
it's
no
so
point
hard.
anyway. Like, even then, if you're in the ocean, there's a good chance you maybe might get eaten by a shark. But like,
Yeah.
you can't do anything about it. Like,
Thrashing's not going to do anything about it.
no, moving around's not. Like, it's better for you just to plank it, dude. Just chill.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So have you dealt with, as you've come into these sort of conclusions, have you dealt at all with nihilism around like, okay, so if there is infinite dimensions, and if I am a slice of God, and this, is everything everywhere all at once, and, there's, because once you really can wrap your mind around infinity, which is, well, first of all, you can't.
Yeah.
But if you even get like the taste of it,
It's terrifying.
it's absolutely terrifying. It's absolutely horrifying, to me anyway.
Yeah.
And then it starts to beg the question, who cares? Like, why? What does it matter? And I feel like that's sort of like, on this path of spiritual development, it's almost like it's a built-in tripwire. It's like, oh, you made it to here? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because now you're going to worry
Here we
about
go.
nothing matters. And it like
Here we
gives you like
go.
this whole new area of development. Did you happen to go through any of that?
Yeah, but like post processing it, I think it made it feel a lot better for me. Like I was definitely a nihilist in my atheist stage too. Like I don't remember what happened before I was here, so it's just going to be the same when I die, you know. And then
Right.
when you go through again, that's another psychedelic epiphany. It's going to slap you right in the face, but that also helped me too. Like understanding infinity through psychedelics is a lot easier. Like when you get outside of time, and because psychedelics, you can spend like what seems like hours in a moment, and then you're like, oh, time doesn't really even matter. And then you go off into those realms, and you're like, everything's a fractal. This is pretty cool. And then like you come back, and you have to process what little memories you have from going there and coming back. 'Cause you don't remember everything, you know. Uh, but going into that and I guess experiencing it helped a lot. But also, I've never really been like that nihilistic, even in my atheistic stage. I always just processed it like I I could handle it either way. I always just felt internally like even if it was infinite or something, there is a reason why I'm here. There's a reason why I have this processing capability of consciousness, and it doesn't feel like it's random. Even as a child, I was like, I feel like I've maybe been here before. Like, I have an understanding of this
Mm.
place, and it's not as scary as a lot of people around me were thinking of it, especially younger, But um, I think just building a conscious understanding that one, you don't have all the answers, and your limited processing capabilities are never going to get you all the answers. We're never going to know anything. So come to terms with that and realize that if
That's
you
a
did
tough
know
one.
everything, huh?
That's a tough one. At least for me, once you trip into this space, and I don't think everybody ends up in this particular place, but
I don't think
I
it's for
showed you
everybody.
that theory of everything, like presentation, right? Like,
Yeah,
or collection of ideas, I should call it. When I first stumbled into that part of this journey, it was like, oh, I'm going to connect all the dots.
yeah.
I'm going to figure it all out. And it's like, you're not going to fucking figure it all
No.
out. It's not possible. Our brains, even if you
Please.
were the smartest person who have ever lived and you lived 1,000 years and you had all the compute power possible, you couldn't,
Come
because
close.
it's like a video game character trying to understand the hardware it's running on. It's impossible.
It will
You
never do
cannot do
that.
it.
Yeah. And
Right.
if you did understand everything, would you not be God? If you understood infinity, would
Right.
you not, you would become God. And then at that point, you know
Right.
everything,
Everything would
and it
just
would be
end.
boring, and it would just end. And then you'd be bored, and then you'd be like, man, I need to do something about this. I need to experience this again. And then from one, you go into duality, and the duality goes into everything that we see now. And you just keep, that's the wheel. That's the Buddhist wheel, the Dharma chakra, like all of that stuff is explaining that concept. I think that was their way of like holding people's hand through thinking about infinity. I think that was the best way
Mm.
that they had to kind of do that. That whole philosophy helped a lot. Like
Yep.
Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, it's very peaceful. It gives you a lot of calmness when they talk about it because it feels like they understand it and they're not freaking out about it. So you're like, oh, okay, well, I can chill a little bit too. I think that's
Do you
very
ever see the
valuable.
explanation of like the flower of life and how each of those circles sort of creates all those different parts
Yeah,
of experience?
yeah.
The
I,
sacred geometry stuff blows my mind because
same.
it really humbles you into thinking like people were so brilliant at a
Thousands of
time
years
when
ago.
it makes no sense that they should have been.
Yeah,
And we went so backwards for so long. And if you listen to Graham Hancock, you
love
familiar with him and his work?
love his work.
Yeah. So you listen to his, theories around, 12,000 ish years ago. There was a piece of a comet that crashed into the earth and basically set us back because most people died. And the ones who were left were basically the ones who were savage enough to fight for what was remaining, right? And so you create this sort of uh, what's the right word? Epigenetic experience of like, okay, it's time to be fucking violent and
Feral.
like ruthless,
Yeah.
right? And now we've had this cascade from about, 10,000-ish years ago forward. And what could have been this beautiful, warm, loving, exploratory, embracing society, we don't know. We have no idea. We have no history of it. But to go all the way back to where this conversation started, where the hell did those pyramids come from? Because the explanations that people have given makes no damn sense. And they
It.
knew some shit.
Have you read the Emerald Tablets?
No.
So I would
Is
I
it
would
Thoth?
yeah, with your experience now, I would visit those. There's like a hour and a half long thing on YouTube that he reads it. Um
Oh, okay.
and whether or not that, so the whole mystery of Thoth and Hermes and all of that is another rabbit hole to dive into, but uh, when he explains it, he ties the Sumerian kings list to that very elegantly, because they were all apparently, if you believe that side of things, they were all working together to develop consciousness on the planet. And the when as soon as they kind of left it to humans to handle, and the Bible says this too, the sons of gods mated with the daughters of men, and they created the ruling class. So at that time, that cataclysm happened, and in the Emerald Tablets, Thoth states that he got notification where he was off doing something. He got notification that the Earth had gone through a cataclysm, and he
Like a
needed to come
push
back.
notification?
Like a push, yeah, his cell phone. He got a notification. He came back, and he was like, "Crap, there's a lot of stuff wrong here. I need to do something." And he says that he was the one that built the pyramids. And if you're thinking about it
Interesting.
in that sense, and I'm not of the necessarily like the ancient aliens theory of like a different species.
Anunnaki and all that?
I'm of the belief that they were similar to us. I'm not saying they were a Homo sapien. I think maybe we were gene spliced, but um, I think that they probably had, some very, if they were capable of space travel, they were capable of doing whatever the hell. I don't. The thing
Anything.
is too precise
Exactly.
to be completed by slaves or anything like that. That's a obviously throwing that out. And if he had technology to do that, I mean, him and a couple other people that had, we could. If I have an earth mover, I by myself can flatten 2 acres of land in a day or two. So depending on their level of technology, I assume that he probably built the structure to restabilize the planet and give um, humans something to develop their knowledge. Because as a primitive human, if you saw that, you'd be like, "What the? This is perfect geometry. This is not natural. How is this built?" You intuitively want to decode it. So it's more like a
Right.
puzzle, a 3D puzzle that's going to develop humans
Mm,
on an unconscious level, but make them conscious. So if you're walking around savage, you survive this cataclysm and you see this pyramid, you're like, okay, well, this is going to provide me shelter, and I need to know what the hell's going on with this thing. So you'd stay around it. You'd
interesting.
probably build a society to try and uncover the truth, and then that to me sounds a lot more logical than they just piled rocks up for a tomb. But
Yeah, people are just dragging these, 1,000,000 2-ton perfectly cut blocks
yeah,
miles down the riverbed. Like, come on.
I actually have there's a video I think I'm posting next week of the the they just came out with the biggest, most capable. It's for marble quarries. It's like an earth
Mm,
mover, but it's a huge one that has these forks. Goes in there, picks these marble blocks up, and takes them out of the quarry. Right. Its maximum capability is 40 tons. The most it can lift, a couple feet off the ground, is 40 tons, and this thing is huge. Not only that, like we could go into that all day, but what I'm saying is like like roads in the U.S. If you can't drive on roads, semis can't pull loads in the U.S. with, I think it's 40 tons is the limit. I think that, and those
right.
are highly engineered roads to maximize the compressive loads from semis to move
Right.
product across the United States. there was no
Yeah,
freaking
mining
way.
trucks like the Euclids and stuff are not allowed on the road for that reason because they would
No.
literally crush it.
And it's only specific roads. If you go like neighborhood roads are not rated for that. Like if the road is not a U.S. dot highway engineered by the Army Corps of Engineers, it's not. You can't drive big heavy machinery, even tractors, on that thing because it's going to crack the road. There's no way that it. There has to have been some way of doing it that was not in our realm of processing right now.
So, what do you recommend for folks who are at the fringes of curious about this kind of stuff? Because there's like an infinite number, because we've talked about a lot of different things, right, in 90 minutes.
Mhm.
And I think it could be overwhelming for folks who haven't plunged all the way in and like drowned themselves in this stuff to feel overwhelmed. Like, where do I even begin on this? It feels like there's so much. Where do you recommend people who are curious about the intersection between the mystical and the physical that they sort of get started? I, by the way, would recommend some of your ebooks because I think they're excellent. But
Thank
if
you very
you
much.
are promoting that or have other areas that you'd like to direct people,
I would
let me know.
say that is my goal with my products is to distill that information as clearly as possible. I'm obviously trying to do like my TikToks. I try and make them like that as well. But what my biggest, the thing that connected everything for me was the Kabbalion. And it's written by the Three Initiates, which is a pretty much a cover for Hermes. Um, Hermes Trismegistus means thrice great. Hermes was Thoth. It's believed that that is a reincarnation of him. And if you read the book, it was written in the early 1900s, but it is probably the easiest way to start to make sense of the Bible or any ancient text that you've ever read. It's kind of like the key that opens a different perspective on understanding those. So I started there because I had a little history in like Christianity and stuff. So it depends on where your background is. If you're very sciencey, quantum. Oh, obviously go into the quantum. It's fascinating. If you're more on the like spiritual side, I would say definitely like oh, just any type of psychedelic literature. Anything talking about like if you've had an experience like that and you're confused on it, I would definitely just start exploring people who like Terrence McKenna or like anybody that talks about that stuff in depth, Joe Rogan even like there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work to bridge the gap, but as far as like a good place to start, Kabbalion's free on YouTube. There's an audiobook on there, and
Nice.
that is I would definitely just immediately binge that. But
Awesome. What are
yeah,
your
we'll
go-to podcasts? Do you have any?
love Aubrey Marcus and Know Thyself, and if you're into like Hindu stuff, Beer Biceps, he does some cool stuff.
Say beer biceps?
Yeah, he's like this. He does it in English, but he's this Indian guy. He interviews a lot of like yogis and people who are doing a lot of the spiritual work over there. I just like getting a lot of perspectives because like, the American perspective is like hyper limited to what you've been told and
Oh
said
yeah.
like in the media. So I try and consume as many sources outside of that as possible. But Graham Hancock, obviously, he's getting a little more mainstream. He has Netflix stuff out there. Randall Carlson for the history, geography, um, just and again, everything like I don't take anything as absolute truth. All truths are but half truths. That's in the Kabbalion. Like there's going to be some stuff that feels right, but it's surrounded by a bunch of what seems like mystical crap. So take those little things that are true and then go back a couple of years later and reread it. So you'll probably get something different. I read the Kabbalion about every other month just because every time I read it, I'm like, didn't get that the first time. So just I open mind, just keep an open mind and take everything that you encounter with a grain of salt.
I love it. Well, Tyler, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for a very engaging conversation, and I'll link in the show notes to all your stuff,
Appreciate you.
your TikTok page, your website, where people can find those ebooks, which I do highly recommend. They're very digestible, even if you don't know anything about any of this stuff. I think it takes a nice journey of helping to ground in language that is it is not a bunch of jargon. It's written for the common person, which I think is awesome. And I look forward to seeing where you go with all this. This is really cool.
Thank you so much, man. I had a great time. Very engaging, very stimulating convo. Like I said, I love the long form, and I appreciate you having me on here, man.
Awesome. Be well.
You too, man.